Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on mental well-being, hosted by OpenUp and Ace and Tate. I'm Sean, the VP of Brand and Marketing here at Ace and Tate. We're live at the Ace and Tate HQ. We've got a really exciting crowd here listening in, so hi to everyone here, and hi to everyone listening at home. Today's panel topic is on how to prioritize mental well-being in the workplace, especially in today's dynamic and changing times. How do we do this as individuals? How do we do this as organizations? So really excited to dive in and go into this topic and get some real practical advice for everyone here and everyone listening. I've got a very exciting group of panelists here, so maybe we start with some introductions and then we can just dive right into it. Joined here first, right to my right here is Anne-Marie, Chief People Officer at OpenUp. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next is Gijs, the founder and CEO of OpenUp, so welcome as well.
Thanks.
And then finally, our very own Leonoor, our head of people here at Ace and Tate. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we start, maybe it's nice if you guys wouldn't mind giving a little bit of introduction about yourselves to the crowd here. Maybe Gijs, we start with you.
I'm Gijs. I'm from background, I was trained as an engineer in the technical university. So when I was young, I was good in mathematics and physics. But I didn't learn so much about people in university. I learned, of course, a lot on parties and in my student house, but not really professionally. And I do like people dynamics, people processes. I have a good memory also for people. So I also studied psychology, and I was trained here in Amsterdam in the OLVG hospital as a clinical psychologist. And now these two worlds of technology, mathematics and physics, and people and psychology are coming together in our company OpenUp. So that makes me a very happy and satisfied founder.
Very cool. Well, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thanks.
Maybe Anne-Marie, you want to go next?
Yes. So my name is Anne-Marie. I am born and raised in Stockholm. My origin is from former Yugoslavia, so I'm bilingual and bicultural in that sense. And professionally, I've been working with HR for the past 25 years, like in many different industries, many different companies, everything from the big corporations to the startup and scale-up scene, and been employed my whole career. Up until like almost 2 years ago when I started my own freelancing and worked with really, really interesting clients, especially in the scale-up arena. And then all of a sudden, there was this Gijs approached me.
This one, right here, you mean?
This one.
Oh, okay. Just making sure there was another one.
One of those very interesting, passionate founders. So we had a chat some time ago, and it was absolutely impossible not to get affected, infected, infatuated with Gijs as a person, but also his business and the product. So I started 3 weeks ago, and here I am as part of my onboarding.
Well, welcome. This is a pretty intense onboarding process, I guess. How you guys do it OpenUp, I guess, right? Just throw you in front of the screen.
Exactly.
That sounds good. That sounds good. Well, we'll pass it over to Leonoor. Maybe you can give a little introduction as well.
Yes, of course. My name is Leonoor. My background is in work and organizational psychology. So from that perspective, also, really interested in the topic we're talking about today. After I graduated, I worked a few years in recruitment before I got my first experience in the startup scene as an HR manager working for a fashion tech startup. In that was only a 1-year experience where we rapidly expanded the team to different markets, but also experienced a reorganization at the same time. So some people might say, okay, not for me. I loved it. It gave me so much energy, and I learned a lot in such a short time that I realized this is the type of organization I want to continue in. And that's how I ended up at Ace and Tate almost 8 years ago as their first people person in the team. From there on, I really built the people function and the team around it. Supported the company in rapid growth and different stages of growth, which was really excited. And today, happy to be here and as a company and for our colleagues here to really raise more awareness on the topic of mental well-being.
Nice. Thank you for that. So super exciting. That's great. So maybe also just so everyone knows how we're going to be doing this today, we're going to spend about 20, 25 minutes going through a bit of a conversation here, talking a little bit deeper into this topic about mental well-being, and then we'd like to open up for questions. So for those of you here, also if you want to come in and sit, there's more seats looking at you over there, Nadine, yeah, specifically you coming in. We've got a mic later we're going to pass around for questions, or alternatively, I don't know here if we have a setup for you guys, but if you're dialing in at home, you can ask your questions and they will magically appear, technology, on this iPad in front of me. So that sounds super good. But let's go right into it. So maybe I'm going to throw this first question to you guys. Why are we here? Why is mental well-being important, both personally, but also from an organizational perspective?
Yeah, so let me then start personally. I think we are all growing up in a way, in a world that is increasingly complex, that is very fast-paced. I mean, if you look at all the information that we get to digest in a normal working day, it's incredible. And then we have also these crises coming to us all the time. So we have an energy crisis, we have a climate crisis, we have a war in Europe. There's so many, we had COVID crisis. There are so many things coming to us that we need to digest, understand with an increasingly larger group of people on the same space that we all share. So I think we are all under pressure in a way. And I think also now in COVID made it, of course, very explicit, this pressure that people can feel. So I think for us personally, it matters. It is one of the most important questions of this century is how will we will feel good in this century? How are we going to live together? So therefore, from a personal standpoint, I really believe it matters to all of us. And then for an organization, of course, an organization is basically a group of talented people together working on a mission, on something that they have in common. So I would say there's not so many difference between the personal aspects of mental well-being and the organizational aspects of mental well-being. It matters. And also work is such a huge part of our lives that you also hope that your organization finds it important, mental well-being, because it's about you. So that would be, I can elaborate on that maybe for 20 minutes, but that would be my kind of short version why I think it's important to be here.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that there are just so many new factors and changes that are happening in the outside world. Sometimes you hear a stereotype, like, oh, this generation, that generation. Is this a generational topic? Is it something everyone faces? Are we just tackling this in different ways? How have you seen that?
So you hear that a lot, that for instance, the new generations have more difficulties than older generations.
Yeah.
I would say if you look at finding a stable situation in life, that's very helpful. So if you have an apartment, if you have a partner, if you have family and friends, if you have a meaningful job, that's really helpful, contributing to mental well-being. And I do believe that for newer generations to find these stable points in life has become more difficult than for older generations.
Right.
So I could also say to older generations, well, maybe it was also a bit easier in a way to find stability in life and to have this feeling of being mentally well and in a safe place. It gets more difficult in society. So yes, and that's of course really reflected on new generations. On the other hand, I do also think that when other people were young in different periods of time, earlier in time, also, of course, finding your place in this world is always a bit stressful. So also older generations can relate to having had stress in their student life or in their early career life. So in that sense, I do believe it's from all ages, but I do think that nowadays it's more difficult to find your place in life.
Yeah, I think that stability point is super interesting, and maybe that's something I can ask you a little bit about as well, because as an employer and as an organization, stability is an important thing to give employees. Yet, as you mentioned, we live in a world with constant changes where we have to be able to react to what's happening outside. So how have you seen organizations really tackle this issue of mental well-being and try to find ways to provide that to employees despite or in lieu of changes that are happening outside and inside of the organization?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I will answer it.
Okay.
But I just want to tap into Gijs, because when you were mentioning the younger generation versus the older generation. Now, I am part of the older generation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I'm 52.
Hey,
yeah.
we didn't ask.
No, I know, but I'm saying.
So I'm just saying we didn't ask.
I know
Okay.
you didn't.
For the record, that
but I'm
wasn't-
being very open and transparent. I'm saying it. Now, why do I say it? Because if I look back at my career, where did I start? Well, I started in the 90s when I finished graduation. Started as a recruiter, and then I've been working through different companies and industries, as I shared earlier. I see such an interesting progression during these 25 years. For myself personally, how I have grown, but also how organizations have grown, right? And this is how it works. When people grow, organizations grow, right? But in the 90s and the beginning of the 20s, our generation, I mean, we didn't have the phone, people. There was no internet. It was paper and pen. With technology, yeah, exactly. And we liked the paper and pen.
I like a pen as well. Yeah. It's
but that basically meant we were in a more protected environment in the sense of the interactions happen in one space, right? With technology, interactions happens everywhere. So we were constantly approached with different. How do you say that in English? Now, this is my Swedish coming through.
throw it out there. Go ahead. Yeah.
with different stimuli that we have, right? Constantly. So I see also that, touching to what Gijs was saying, that it was actually a bit easier when we were growing up, whereas now with the younger generation, and I'm also a mother. I have a 16-year-old, I have a 21-year-old. I see what they are, how they are living, and also with social media, what that does to them. So it also challenges me not only as an HR leader, but also as a mother. How do I make sure that my kids are okay in this very fast-changing world? Now, does that differ from my role as an HR leader in an organization? Well, I would say not really. Because when I say to my kids, you know what, sometimes life can be overwhelming, and that's fine, because that's part of life. What do I say to our employees, for example? Well, you are a human, you are an individual, you come to work. You come with your full self, you come and work is part of your life. And life can be overwhelming. So it's okay to not be okay. That's basically, the essence, right? And then, of course, as an HR leader and as employer, it is also our responsibility to make sure that we can help then when people are not feeling okay. And this is clearly where the responsibility of the employer is so very, very important, because we're all humans and we navigate in a very, very complex world, even for a 52-year-old.
Fair enough.
Yeah?
Fair enough. It's for everybody.
Yeah, for everybody.
How have you seen that, Lynn? I mean, like you mentioned, you've really been part of Ace and Tate's growth for a long time, and you've seen us go through so many phases. How have you seen our organization look at mental well-being and engage with our employees?
Yeah, so it definitely has been quite a journey where I think in general the team we have is very young. So we have that young generation working for us. And there you see, actually today, I even had a chat with somebody in the team saying like, hey, next month I need to leave my house because somebody ended the lease with my apartment. Like these kind of things, just as Gijs said, they're happening a lot. So there's a lot of things going on in people's personal lives, and it's so important to also address them and to talk about them at work, and not just focus on just the productivity and just the things you finish at work, but also how are you doing, what's going on in your lives, because in the younger generation, as you mentioned, it's not always easy, and there's a lot happening. And of course, we also went through the pandemic, like a lot of organizations, but there was definitely a phase and a point in time where we noticed people had more challenges, and that was actually for us also the trigger point to start a collaboration with OpenUp. So for us, that was an important point in time where we said, okay, we need to pay more attention to mental well-being and really put it on the agenda.
And I think with this conversation in mind, maybe Gijs, I can ask you this as well, because we've kind of now framed the context of the conversation around external inputs and what's happening where all of us individuals, you, me, everyone is facing. So as an individual, what can we do to stay mentally fit? How can we take ownership of that, and what are the tools available to us so that we're not necessarily just dependent on what's happening outside?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot available in the outside world that you can use as an individual to train yourself and develop yourself. So I would say it starts with curiosity towards yourself and the environment and how you behave in that environment. So, but if that curiosity is there, and it's quite something we all have, curiosity. And then you can start learning, okay, in what kind of settings do I behave like A or B, and how do I feel with that? And you can start practicing how you can influence that. So when I was in elementary school, we don't really got that in school, but nowadays I think it's also more and more in schools that you learn children how to deal with emotions, how to understand when you are overwhelmed with emotions and how to manage that, how to step out of a situation. And that's all what we can train. So, and then I think if I would have to give one advice, I would say focus on what you can control. So it's kind of, find your circle of influence and focus on the elements in that circle of influence. So for instance, if you go through a very stressful period at work, and you like doing sports and go for a run, then make sure you never sacrifice on that going for a run. Because that's something that gives you that sense of control, is helping you. So find these elements in your emotional life, in your well-being, that is really helpful for you, that you have control over, and make sure that you make them kind of holy in your everyday schedule, to not sacrifice on the elements that are really helpful for you.
Should we think about mental resilience as almost, is it similar to like a muscle? Is it a thing that you train and get better back over time? Or is it I guess I should say that what I hear sometimes is the stigma is it's a problem to solve. How do we think about this? Is it something that you need to work at and improve incrementally? Is it a thing? How does that...
Yeah, so nowadays in psychology, we often indeed call resilience a muscle. So that you can train it. It's also a very positive message. It's something you can really work on.
Yeah.
But I do believe, there's always, of course, this set of characteristics that you got from nature by birth. And then you have this environment and you need to get to understand yourself better. So it's always a bit of both. So there's something that you were born with as a set of capacities.
Yep.
And there's something you can train. But of course, resilience is something you can work on. And we know that, for instance, lifestyle is very much connected to resilience. And so if you drink alcohol, on the short run, you may feel relaxed and relieved, but on the long run, it's not helping you if you drink too much. And the same is with sports, On the short run, you might be too tired to go for running, but if you went for a run, you feel refreshed again. So there's always this element you can train in resilience, and of course you have your own characteristics that you always bring to the table.
And maybe for you, Anne-Marie, when you think about the building resilience, are there tools and practical examples in your career that you've seen organizations have done to help employees in this space?
Yeah, I think, well, clearly, obviously, partnering with companies like OpenUp, where you get that expert help.
Yeah.
One-to-one sessions or open sessions. That's clearly one path. But I think there are a lot of things that employers can do, and I think the most important thing is, I don't know whether it is only on resilience, but it's, if we talk about the topic of mental well-being, is to raise the awareness on it, to educate the organization. And to also make sure that it is not a one-time event, that is something that is constantly on the agenda, because it is, right? It's not like, well, we do one activity and then you will be resilient. It is actually something that should be embedded in the strategy and preferably in the people strategy, which is then connected to the business strategy. Yeah. So I think that is important. That is something that is reoccurring. And it goes back to what you were saying. It's practice, right? It's learning. It's growing.
Yeah.
It's part of daily life.
Have you seen that similar also for Ace and Tate as well, Leonoor?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you look at our values, we've kind of translated them also into certain behaviors where we feel, okay, these are important characteristics to have in a type of organization as we are, which is fast-paced, changing. One of them is stay flexible. So we really, it's not that we only hire people who are like fully flexible. What it is, we show here that it is important to have and to train, and that we pay attention to it. Another one is to have like a positive mindset and stay positive, to look at things with a solution-focused mind. And I think by identifying these behaviors and incorporating them in our policies, handbooks, even when having like performance reviews, it is something that we want to talk about because we notice that it is important to have this to cope with the changes we have in the organization that we are. So I think that's one example of how we think about it and see resilience as an important part of the company. And next to that, like we also organized talks around the topic, and of course, communicating and sharing knowledge is also important. Where OpenUp is a great help.
How about, Gijs, we talked a little bit now, we talked about the kind of wider organizational approach, we've looked at individuals. Maybe if we dive into teams, so parts and pieces of these organizations where you might have a manager-employee relationship. What steps and tools can someone who is managing a team, a group of people, take to help also foster resilience and within their group of their team members?
A very good question. I also recently learned that the manager is the second most influential person on your mental well-being in your life.
In your life.
So you have your partner, if you have a partner, and the partner is very much of influence, of course. Being maybe supportive or not. So that's the partner at home. But your manager is very much also important for your mental well-being. Also, if you look at return on investment, a bit of economic perspective.
We like it.
Return on investment of mental well-being interventions, if they're aimed at the manager and improving the skills of the manager, that has the highest return on investment.
Wow.
So that's at least showing that this manager is so important, and what can he or she then do? Well, in my opinion, it all starts with the meaningful conversation. So are you able to engage in this meaningful conversation and develop that in your team? Are you also curious to how the people in your team are doing? Is also their well-being or psychology a subject on the agenda? And so not only about targets, about the to-do, about the things that need to be done, but also about the psychology of people. So I would say having this capacity and train someone in this meaningful conversation can be very helpful.
Are there practical tools that can help managers in that case? Because to your point, of course, not all managers are clinical professionals like yourself.
No. I know.
So how far can a manager go, and what can they do?
So it starts at least with the willingness to develop this skill.
Right.
And if the willingness is there,
right,
then it starts with making time for it. If you don't make time for such a process, then you won't succeed. So that's the kind of the second step: make time for it. And then if you do it, you could always start with having 3 or 4 questions that you write down, and that are kind of helping you to structure such a meeting. So it can be that you ask someone what are the struggles that you are now having, or what is the biggest problem that you face, or what are you most proud of, or what skills did you use to solve this challenge. So you can also have these kind of example questions as a manager that you can just start using to speed up the conversation. That would be my first very basic advice.
Very good. Thank you. Leonoor, have you seen that as well, the role of team managers in the play for mental well-being here at Ace and Tate?
Yes, definitely. I think they play a very important role. And I think it's also important to show the organization that people leaders can also be vulnerable. So for example, organize a talk with a people leader and sharing their struggle and their story and how they dealt with it can be a super powerful tool to show the rest of the organization it's okay to talk about your struggles. I think in the past we had an interview with Mark de Lange, our CEO, who actually also shared some of his struggles, and that was broadcasted internally as well. So yeah, setting that right example is important, and also to tie in with the meaningful conversations. One step before is to understand some signs or trigger points that can lead to initiating a conversation like that. Is somebody all of a sudden more irritable, or you see they're fatigued, or there's other things you can notice that the behavior is a bit off with somebody in your team, and that can be a good reason to start a conversation and say like, hey, I noticed, you responded a bit differently in our meeting. How are you doing? Is there something, going on that I can help you with? So I think that can definitely be a good addition. And I think at Ace and Tate, we care a lot about having good connections with everyone.
That's for sure.
So of course you have the support system of your peers, which is very important. But in the relationship with your manager, that also helps in having those regular check-ins and just having the culture where we not only talk about work, but we already have the tendency to sit with each other around lunch to discuss things that are going on in your private life, and that sets a good basis to hopefully open up sooner. Yeah.
I think with that in mind, I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to you guys here for questions. Also, if you're listening in at home, start typing them now, and then we can pull up in a minute. But I've got maybe one more I want to address your way after you finish your water. So please take your time. It's
Let's see if I can move.
so what are the, from an organizational perspective, when we think about this topic, mental well-being, what are the trends? What are the things that are coming that we have to think about when we look at really supporting and fostering positive mental well-being in our employees?
Well, I think the clearest trend is that it's on the agenda. I mean, and I think that was accelerated by the pandemic. So, I mean, there were a lot of bad things with the pandemic, but I think one of the good things was that there were some good learnings on how do we as human behave, what are the things that are important for us with regards to mental well-being. It was very clear during the pandemic, where the majority of us were working from home and not interacting with people, what that actually does to us when we only interact online. It became super clear that, meeting in person, having those social interactions is actually crucial for
Absolutely.
feeling well.
Absolutely.
I think, and that acceleration of raising that topic to the agenda of, I think not only a societal agenda, but also obviously on the business agenda for employers, I think that was absolutely fantastic, because now and again, looking back to, a few years ago, we were not comfortable talking about, how we maybe were, the struggles that we were going through. I really, really see that the trend is now, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay for me to raise it. And I think that normalization of that conversation is, I would say, one of the most important trends that we have now in, human development and organizational development. So, I think also it has never been more difficult to be human today than we are today. But at the same time, it has never been more interesting to be human today because of the world that we live in. So, it's cool.
It's definitely true.
Yeah, but it's cool, right? And it's not easy, but then it's okay to say that it's not easy. And also make sure that we, have tools, friends, partners, an employer who cares about you, and that can support you on that whole human being aspect.
Thing.
Yes, the thing.
Very good. Well, let's have a look here. If anyone here, maybe we'll open up to the crowd here. Are there any questions you want to ask our panelists today? Things that popped up that you're dying to ask? What we got going on? Otherwise, I'm going to call names out. So, no? Anna, what do you got? Yeah. I'll repeat it.
What if you're a bit, you know you have to do a lot of work, you want to see your friends, how do you fit it all in your day?
That's an awesome question. So we'll just ask for those of you who couldn't hear it as we talked about taking control and ownership of what you're doing, but what do you do when you've got so many things to do? You've got work, you've got home, you've got family, you've got sports. How do you handle all that stuff? It's a great question. Looking at, I think it was addressed directly at you, Gijs. There was just like this
We all
eye contact.
struggle with that.
Yeah, that's why I'm also asking you. Like, hey.
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah. Let me first state it's very difficult. I can really relate to the challenge that you have in managing all these very appealing activities that we have. And, you know, we also get informed on everything that is happening. So we know also that everything is happening. So we have also fear of missing it out. Then I would say structure is the answer. You know, making a bit of a planning, things that you really value the most, make sure it is repetitively present in your calendar. For instance, sports or some very close friends. But also, of course, there's some sort of a limitation to structure because you don't want to structure everything and maybe, you know, schedule for 6 weeks ahead. That maybe also feels a bit too structured sometimes. So there's some sort of a balance. I would say if this is the main challenge, I think you will find your answer during time because I do realize that when you get, I now have, for instance, 2 young children, and that makes already choices so much easier. I'm not saying this is about children to solve it. That's not my suggestion. But my suggestion is at least that it's also a process you're in to find out what you really value. I think if I need to give one advice on this, it's really work your core values. So what is really in line with your values? Is it, you know, going to a festival on the weekend, or is it having an intimate dinner with friends? If you really need to make choices, what would you choose? And then then work on that value, stick to it.
Yeah, if I can maybe add to that, just I wanted to share indeed also a personal experience in that when I also have 2 young children, and when I became a parent for the first time, I had this very demanding, busy job, and I loved it. And I was always working like quite late and joining all the events, but also in my private life, going to all the festivals, that kind of thing. But then I really created this new identity, and I first tried to just keep doing the same, but it doesn't work. And what helped for me was really to indeed look at the things that are going on in your life and really see, okay, what's the most meaningful. But what I did is I did less, but I made the events themselves more meaningful. So I would really mindful if I had a dinner with friends to really enjoy it the fullest, and maybe I would only have it once every month or 2 months instead of every week. But that really, helped me personally to get adjusted to that new, life.
I think also, I think that was such a great question. I think probably everyone can echo that. How do you actually do everything? You want to do everything, right? One of the things that I have learned is, and I'm still learning it, is to be kind to myself. Not to beat myself up too often, which I do. Because seriously, I mean, there is no way that I can do everything, but I want to. And then even if I have a very ambitious plan, I realize, okay, my ambition was a good one, but I didn't have time to do it. And then I'm like, well, I did this, and that was fine. So I'm trying to be kind to myself and to say, well, it's okay. I was okay. It wasn't everything, but it was a part of it. So being kind, yeah.
No, I really like it. It reminds me of someone who said, I started a lot of new books, but I never finished the books.
Right.
And then I was punishing myself for not finishing these books. And now she is very happy with herself that she at least starts all these new books.
Exactly.
So I like that perspective taking.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
start.
it is. It is.
I think also what you mentioned at the very beginning is a really powerful tool is to spend time for yourself thinking about what your values are, which is a little bit what you mentioned before about growing is actually putting that time in. Like, what do I care about? What are my value systems? And having that in place, I can say also for myself personally, then helps me to make decisions where I prioritize and be kinder because I can reference back to those systems as well.
And companies are doing the same, because companies also
Precisely.
emphasize on values.
Precisely.
Because of this.
Precisely. Very good. Maybe we have a chance for one more volunteer question. Yes.
Yes, so my question is for anyone. What is the main message you would like to give to organizations that are struggling with breaking the stigma around the topic? Because, even though I think we're seeing a trend that it's becoming more normal, I still talk to a lot of people that are struggling. Like, how do you start? So what's kind of the tip or the main message you want to give to those organizations?
So very good. Just to repeat the question was, what kind of advice can we give to organizations that are struggling to start this conversation and break the stigma around discussing and prioritizing mental well-being in their organizations? What kind of tips can we give those organizations? You want to go ahead, Leonoor?
I think it depends if you want the organization to pay more attention to this. I think the first group to talk to is the management to get the leaders on board. And I think to talk to them, it's really important to show them the importance of mental well-being, show them the numbers, show them the return on investment. Maybe by conducting surveys in your organization, you can collect data. I think that always works well when approaching more senior leaders. And once you get the conversation going with them, you can start small. Like, you don't need to implement all these new policies and start a lot of initiatives at the same time. You can start with a small event, with somebody opening up, and from there, build it from there.
Yeah, I'm now the founder and the CEO of OpenUp, and I'm a first-time CEO, basically. As a founder, you also become the CEO often of such a company, and you need to build it. And then I had examples of CEOs in my mind, like Steve Jobs or other very visible CEOs. And then I really need to learn from, okay, but every CEO has its own style, for instance. And I have a lot of dilemmas in my everyday life, and I think a lot about them. I can easily be worried. And what I learned in this process is also to open up about your own worries as a manager or your dilemmas. So, and I think that can be also a great step for others to also share their dilemma. What I really enjoyed in the interview with Mark de Lange, that Mark shared about having sometimes problems with sleep. I think if Mark shares such a very intimate topic, basically, with his colleagues, that can really be supportive to other colleagues to say, okay, I also sometimes sleep not so well because I worry. And then you have the conversation going. So I think it starts kind of small, but it always starts with a dilemma, something you worry about. And I think indeed managers can play a role to open that up. And if you want to open it up as an employee, I would say also start small. Start with something small and then see how people respond to it. So test the waters little bit, and work from there.
I'm curious, Anne-Marie, because there are a lot of companies, and maybe it is also a trend, but who start these employee resource groups around mental well-being. Have you seen that as well, and how was that a success?
It was like you were reading my mind.
Oh.
I was like, you said so many good things there, and I was just thinking about, okay, I echo everything you say. The tone from the top, I would say, is super important. I think managers showing a bit of vulnerability and sharing their personal stories and how they struggle. I think also, I think I said it before, but the fact that this is not a one-time event. It's something that is continuous. It's part of your learning agenda. It's part of your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging agenda. But I think the most important thing, I would say, apart from the tone from the top, is to include your people on the journey. Because the people will tell you, they will actually tell you, these are topics that we would like to talk about. And I think if you have that constant dialogue, whether you call it employee resource groups, ambassadors, or whatever, I think this will help the conversation. It will help the roadmap. It will help bring that trust and inclusion with design, just with that dialogue. So I think, asking questions, actively listening to your people, and they will guide you on what are the next steps. So I think that is super impactful, and that I've seen that in several companies. And so if there's anything I'd like to just stress, it's include your people on the how.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I actually can't think of a better way to conclude this panel with that message. First, thanks to the three of you for taking the time to come here and share your insights and your learning, your experience. Thanks for everyone took the time also to come here and listen in and listen from home. Maybe before we go, Gijs, do you have any last things you want to say also from OpenUp, people that want to learn more about this topic?
Yeah, what I hope is that we are a platform that you can easily go to and find, answers to the questions you may have, or to the curiosity inside of you. And I think it can also be a very interesting journey to be on, to get to know yourself better. So, although sometimes it's hard, but it's also very satisfying to get to know yourself.
Very good. Thanks so much. I think at this point we're going to wrap it up. Again, thank you to everyone who's listening here and at home, and thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.